obligation or as a routine practice, something to be done and got out of the way. Prayer must be the engagement of the whole person with the Creator. And that was why I was talking about, I was trying to put the emphasis on the word you. See, when Jesus says in verse 5, when you pray, so I took up the word you and I was trying to unpack that word. In fact, over nearly 60 minutes, all that we actually managed to do was to look into the implications of that word you. And at that time I said that there are three dimensions, the physical, the mental, the spiritual, which is a larger. I talked about the larger or wider rhythm of life. So today, I want to take that thought a little further ahead. Now, even outside the context of religion, it is obvious that the worth or gravity or grandeur of a human being depends on the extent to which that person has grown in respect of the larger awareness of life. You can actually grade people, if you like, on the basis of the scale of their awareness. If you are an underdeveloped person, your awareness is only very limited to the mere immediate functional aspects. If you are slightly more developed as a human being, your awareness or the range of your awareness will extend a little more. And depending on your spiritual evolution or development, your consciousness can actually become equal to the consciousness of the whole universe. And, someone like the British poet, what's his name? William Blake, had this kind of an intuition. And he said that a spiritually enlightened person is one who can see the universe in a particle of sand. See the universe in a particle of sand. Now, for example, when we look at Jesus Christ, what was the secret of his greatness? Sorry, my computer is malfunctioning. My tablet. Let me see if I can get my notes. Okay. Now, Jesus's awareness was extraordinary, so much so he could intuit, he could sense what people were feeling in their hearts. Now, this is not an exaggeration. It is possible. It all depends on the quality of our awareness, which reflects the extent of our spiritual development. And today, therefore, I want to continue to relate prayer to the dynamics of human growth. I want to do it because that is not the way it is usually understood. Very often, prayer is practiced in a crude manner as a kind of cosmic shopping, providing a list of desires to the Almighty, who is bound to oblige. Now, today I want to, as a matter of preface, want to say that this larger awareness that everyone needs to cultivate if we want to be fully human is certainly enabled by prayer, but there are also other necessary aspects to this. When I say these things, please do not close your mind immediately. Give me a chance to explain what I mean. I feel, for example, that wider reading, larger exposure to different aspects of reality is a necessary thing in spiritual life. I need to emphasize this because we are quite used to being told that secular knowledge is a hindrance to spiritual life. I have to say this very frankly and very forthrightly, that my experience has been quite the contrary. Wider awareness acquired through intellectual quest also helps me in my spiritual life. The second area that I want to emphasize is awareness gained through practical involvement in life. That is experience-based expansion of our awareness. Would you please mute your microphones, because I'm getting distracting noises. Yeah, it's quite annoying. Thank you. So, most of us, or most people, live in a very narrow framework. And they don't realize the existential bankruptcy, the poverty of their life, because they shut out all other areas of awareness and choose to stay confined within a narrow framework. Now, this is also understood as peace, a state of life from which all sources of turbulence are shut out. I'm afraid it's anything but peace. This is poverty. It is poverty mistaken as peace. It's been my experience all the way through that my life as an activist has been immensely beneficial. And this is not merely what I am discovering or suggesting. Now look at what Jesus did to his disciples. He not only taught them to pray, but he also sent them out. Why did Jesus send them out? Because, first of all, they have to make a contribution, that's fine, but also because you must realize that this is a period when Jesus was training them. This wider exposure is necessary for their own growth. And what is the proof for this? Jesus calls them back from time to time, interacts with them on their experiences, and then counsels them. So it's very obvious that Jesus laid emphasis on the need to expose oneself to a whole array of experiences and involvements. Now, why is this necessary for us to emphasize? Because somehow we have understood our religious life as consisting entirely of what happens within the church circles, the church compound, or what's called Christian fellowship. I believe that exposure to the wider world is absolutely vital for our spiritual sanity, for our spiritual vitality, for increasing our awareness. And this in turn influences our prayer. That's what Jesus said, awake or watch and pray. All right, now let's now go further afield. Why should we pray? Prayer is an acknowledgement that there is a great deal beyond us that is relevant to our own life. You see, we have a tendency to think that only what is in the immediate vicinity of our life is relevant to us, and we can manage by learning to cope with these things. Now, this is a misconception. God has so designed the whole of his creation that there is this principle of interdependence. Our life, for example, today owes a great deal to all that humankind has done in the last, say, 7,000, 8,000 years of civilization. And we may not be able to know every detail of it, but to the extent that it is possible, it is desirable to widen the range of our awareness, though the assumption in our midst is quite the contrary. Now, even in respect of our own individual life, there are resources that are available to us, of which we choose to remain unaware, and to that extent, we make our life poor and even fruitless. So, the biblical assumption and the commonsensical understanding of the human life is that no human being is sufficient in himself or herself. We need to depend, we need to derive our resources, we need to be empowered, we need to be enhanced. And we are placed in a context from which we can derive a great deal of sustenance, both intellectual and spiritual. So, in other words, I'm actually pleading for enlarging our understanding about the scope of what constitutes spirituality. Now, there are, of course, two attitudes to life. One is the attitude by which we are only concerned about mere survival. I must survive from day to day, I must not die. The other attitude to life is that I must be vitally alive. It's not enough to survive. That's why Jesus said, I have come that they may have life, and life in all its fullness. So Jesus, in saying so, was giving us a yardstick by which to measure ourselves and our predicament. If we are measured by the yardstick of life in its fullness, where will we stand? This is a question that needs to be asked. And prayer, I submit, must be hitched to or related to or aligned to this goal that Jesus has prescribed for us, this norm that Jesus has prescribed for us of living life in its fullness. So the key to this life in all its fullness is larger awareness and the many actions, initiatives that we would undertake because there is a larger awareness in us. Now, our actions, our strategies, our quests are all determined by our awareness. Animals do not undertake the kind of searches or quests that we undertake because their awareness is limited. In fact, the main difference between animals and human beings is the quality and extent of our awareness. So for that reason itself, it's obvious that we have a spiritual duty to enlarge our awareness. Now, it's therefore necessary, it is necessary for us to wake up to the fact that for the most part in our life, we are merely stuck in the very narrow routine of life. Now, when I say this, I do not want to belittle the routine of life. Life in its routine is important. The routine aspects of life must be attended to. But routine becomes a problem when we turn it into a trap, when we turn it into a prison, as though there is nothing beyond the routine. See, all routine activities are less than human. For example, we walk. Animals also walk. We sleep. Animals also sleep. We eat and digest food. Animals do the same thing. But animals don't think. Thinking is not a routine activity. Animals do not wonder about the greatness and the glory of creation. Animals do not seek a metaphysical dimension to life. Now, all these things go beyond the range of routine, and that's something I want to emphasize today. So, it is important for us to realize that in the case of a vast majority of people, life is contained or limited entirely to the very tiny elbow room of the daily routine. And this is something that Jesus alerts us to through the two sisters in Bethany, Mary and Martha. Now, I remember discussing this in a ladies group years ago, and many of the ladies were very upset with what I said. When I said that, Martha's choice was not upheld by Jesus, and indeed Jesus commended Mary for her choice. So the question normally asked is it not important to practice hospitality? If you don't work in the kitchen, how will you eat? So on and so forth. Well, eating is important. The physical needs have to be taken care of. A home has to be run. All that's fine. But that's not the whole of life. The problem is not that, something is done in the kitchen or something has to be done in the kitchen. It becomes a problem when life is nothing but these routine activities. So there is a need, and prayer as a discipline is meant to enable us to widen this horizon. Now, for example, if you examine yourself for a moment, and I do this for myself, when we sit and pray, we are a different self, right? We're all very noble. We entertain very noble selves. We are very refined in the language that we use, in the sentiments that we express, and the priorities perhaps that we present. But the moment the prayer ends, we become a different self altogether. And actually, if you look at your experience in prayer and compare it with what you are outside of prayer, you will begin to be a little uneasy about yourself. I mean, begin to ask, am I a split personality, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde? Because the kind of noble self we are in the context of prayer, we are not when the prayer ends and the routine life begins. Whereas prayer as an exercise is given to us so that we may connect with that noble self which is hiding within us, and then carry that into the routine of life. Carry that into the warp and woof of life, into the texture of life. And that is what is meant by abiding in prayer. People think that abiding in prayer means, sitting in prayer on your knees 24/7. I mean, just yesterday, I think the new head of the Orthodox Church was enthroned. And I was watching the program and then the newspaper, the video report, etc. And the camera focused all the time on the callus that's formed on the knuckles of the bishop, and all the time emphasizing the fact that he is a man of prayer. He's a man of prayer. Look at him. He's a man of prayer. He's a man of prayer. I'm not disputing that. But what I'm saying is that this idea, in fact, this thought occurred to me because I saw that program. This focus on the knuckles actually indicates a superstition or a misunderstanding of the meaning and the usefulness of prayer. The idea is that it's not that you should be on your knuckles 24/7. The idea is that the attitude of prayer and your noble self to which you connect through that experience of prayer must be carried into the general run of your life. That's the idea. It is not at all the biblical teaching that you should spend 24/7 on your knees. That is just not the case. And certainly you don't see that in the case of Jesus Christ. But you see that prayerful attitude, the quality of that prayerful attitude in every word that Jesus uttered, and every action and reaction that we see in him, everything that he did and everything that he did not do. That is the idea of being in prayer or abiding in prayer. But this has been completely misrepresented, and we are all losers in the process. So, we need, for example, awarenesses of different kinds. And when you study the teachings of Jesus Christ, you will come to know more and more of this. But as an illustration, let me take the parable of the talents, because that's well known to everyone. You see, when the servants are given the talents, the good and faithful servants had two different kinds of awareness. First is, there is an awareness of the value of the talents received. 5 talents is a lot of money. And those who know the calculation say that in Jesus's days, a talent had the same purchasing power as maybe $100,000 in our times, or maybe even more. So it's not a small amount. So if somebody got 5 talents, it's certainly a huge capital, if you like. So the good and faithful servant had an awareness of the intrinsic value, the value in itself of, as it is, of the 5 talents. But that's not the end of the story. There's another awareness that works, which the third servant does not have. And that's the reason why this awareness is so important. The first and the second servants had another dimension of awareness, which is the awareness of what can be achieved, what awaits, or what can be reached through the value of the given. So awareness of the given and the awareness of the to be attained, the awareness of the possible. That is where faith, hope, and love come. So as Paul writes to Corinthians in the first letter, chapter 13, he says, in the end, only 3 things endure: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of this is love. So it's only in relation to the dimension to be attained that faith, hope, and love become real and powerful. So the awareness of what remains to be attained is actually the more important dimension of our faithfulness. Now, this is important because we talk about faithfulness. Actually, we talk more about faith. We seldom talk about faithfulness, right? Because there is a magical understanding of faith. And that magical understanding obscures our duty to be faithful. So faithfulness actually pertains more to this dimension of awareness. And therefore, we cannot be faithful if our awareness shrinks to a very tiny spot. And the problem with the third servant who went and buried his talent was that he lacked this awareness. And because that awareness was missing in him, he became an object of condemnation. He was cast out into outer darkness. Now, therefore, now coming back to ourselves, we have a need to attain an enlarged awareness of ourselves. Now, when I say this, please do not go to the other extreme of saying that I am recommending self-obsession, which is actually a sign of pathology, a sign of illness. I'm not suggesting self-obsession. I'm suggesting greater self-awareness, which is a truthful understanding of our own present predicament. Now, the question is, how can we arrive at a truthful understanding of our present predicament? For that, we need a measure or a yardstick or a norm to judge us by. And that norm, that measure, has to be obtained from the teachings of Jesus Christ. If we measure ourselves with our own standards, we are perfect. Everyone is perfect. It's quite easy for us to justify ourselves and stay put where we are without with the willingness to change or improve. And this is what happens all the time, because we measure us with our own standards. And the real understanding or awareness of where we are and what our plight is comes when we do that. We adopt a different standard, which is to be derived from Jesus Christ. And that's also the meaning of the sentence, of the statement, Jesus is the light of the world. Light in that context is the condition that enables the realization of the truth. If you're sitting in darkness, there is no difference. The moment light comes, differences begin to appear. So light is a light of discrimination, of realization. It's also the symbol of larger awareness. So we need that greater awareness of the self, because as Lord Buddha said, the most primary requirement is the awareness that there is something wrong with us, that we are in a state of misery. That's what Buddha says, the 4 golden rules. It starts with the awareness that we are in a sea of misery. Human existence is in a sea of misery or suffering, unless and until that is recognized. And this is the reason why the doctrine of original sin exists in the Old Testament. The idea of the original sin is nothing but the idea that though we are a great and glorious creation, that there is a problem, a very serious problem at the heart of it. And because of that problem, human existence on this earth is anything but ideal, is anything but perfect. So unless and until we realize that we are far away from the normal, we would not recognize or accept the need to move on. And it's because this awareness is lacking that people are just happy to stay put where they are. And that's the reason why decades and decades of preaching of the gospel, conventions, crusades, faith meetings, revival meetings, etc., leave no change behind. They come and go like bubbles. The reason is that the awareness in truth of one's predicament is lacking, and therefore individuals do not recognize or feel the need to change themselves in any respect. So the need for a greater awareness of one's own predicament, and then the awareness of what we are envisaged to be by God, and that also is embedded in the Old Testament, created in the image and likeness of God. And looking at our predicament today, we find it very difficult to believe that that was how we were created, in the image and likeness of God. In fact, looking at ourselves, we would say anything but the image and likeness of God. So there is this huge gulf between us and the nature of God. And this gulf is something that we need to bridge. And that is the scope of all spiritual discipline, or every aspect of the spiritual discipline that Jesus has prescribed. But unfortunately, when these are turned into rituals in organized religiosity, the emphasis shifts to something else. They become mere observances, which individuals are duty bound to merely either watch being performed or undergo in a kind of mechanical fashion, leaving the individual's plight completely untouched. And therefore, individuals remain in the state of a frozen and untransformed degradation. So our prayer needs to touch these realities. For example, when Jesus teaches us to pray, our Father in heaven, then of course the comparison is immediately constituted. I'm not going to undertake a detailed textual analysis of the small prayer that Jesus has taught us. Maybe we can do that later on. But surely a certain norm is embedded in that statement, in that acknowledgement. And it's by that we have to judge ourselves. You see, at this time, I'm reminded of the motto of my college, St. Stephen's College. The motto of the college is ad Dei gloriam. Now, it's a Latin phrase, to the glory of God. And just imagine, the motto of St. Stephen's College is to the glory of God. That is to say, everything that the college stands for, everything that the college does, everything that happens in the college by way of practicing education must be guided by this goal of glorifying God. But the life of the college is anything but that. And college became a playground of the rich, the powerful, the stylish, the social elite, and it was filled with ungodliness. And as it happens in the motto of all institutions, the motto of St. Stephen's College did not connect to its inner life. So that is actually the way all spiritual ideals function in our religious life. They're all there, we acknowledge them, but they don't connect to our life. So the idea that mere survival is not enough, we have to go beyond the routine of life and to enter into the wider possibilities of life underlies the discipline of prayer. So prayer is therefore, and this I'm going to conclude this part of my discussion, prayer is therefore the foremost resource given to us to become fully human. But in saying this, I also want to repeat what I said at the outset, that prayer cannot be separated from this wider awareness, which must be enhanced also through, in my experience, in my conviction, wider reading, wider participation in the adventure of life, the richness and range of experience. Leading a selfish, self-contained, narrow little life, I don't believe has any spiritual merit. And in fact, prayer as a discipline is given to us so that we are reminded every now and then of the need to break out of it. How does the Lord's Prayer end? For thine is the glory, thine is the power and the glory forever and ever. Thine is the kingdom, the power and the glory forever and ever. So it's a great awareness. And if the glory of God is a reality, then we need to sort of align ourselves to that goal as well. So the importance of keeping the goal of becoming more and more fully and richly human in the practice of prayer as a spiritual discipline. So the idea, of course, it is taken as the given in the teachings of Jesus Christ. It's impossible for human beings to be fully human unless individually we are connected to God. For God is the source of our life, and we need to be enriched, fortified, regaled through a continuous communion with the very source of our life. So it was in this context that in the last session, I introduced the three symbols of salt, light, spirit, etc. And all of that I said at that time is presupposed in what I'm continuing to say today also. Now let me take the next step forward. I want to now say that prayer is a form of energy. Prayer is a form of energy. And therefore, prayer must be a lively thing, a vital thing. It is not to be uttered between sleep and wakefulness. That, as I said before, it has to engage the fullness of our being. Prayer is a form of energy, but energy for what? Now, I've said this before, but it bears repetition. The question that prayer as a spiritual discipline confronts us with is this: do you really need spiritual energy in your life? If you need, what for? What are the contexts? What are the situations? What are the enterprises? What are the missions in your life where you need spiritual energy? In fact, the way we live, we only need the energy of money. Then, of course, muscular energy, a little health. But more than that, I doubt if spiritual energy is a felt requirement for any of us in the kind of routinized life that we lead. And therefore, I believe that there is an element of hypocrisy in praying. Because if praying is a form of energy, or put more accurately, if praying is the mode by which we connect to the source of energy, the wider energy, the divine energy, the question, of course, becomes very real. Why should we connect to that source when we have no need for that energy? Now, if all that we need is relief from some temporary distress, or the provision of some facilities which we think we would be better off if we have, for which we can't bother to work hard, some kind of unmerited, undeserved divine favors, all that is not included in this idea of the spiritual energy. Spiritual energy, by its very definition, pertains to what exists outside the range of our routine life. When we undertake godly missions, when we stand up for it, as Jesus said, seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you. So when we actually move into that zone of activities where we seek the kingdom of God and his justice in this world, then it is that we experience in truth the need for spiritual energy. If we don't do that, and we have nothing to do with that at all, why in the world would we need spiritual energy? Then if we are resorting to prayer, the truth of the matter is that for us, prayer is nothing but a kind of shopping list. And that I don't believe is prayer at all. Unfortunately, that is how prayer has been misinterpreted and mispracticed all these many centuries. That's the reason why it is necessary for us to re-examine some of these very, very superstitious, unspiritual assumptions. So now this energy, when I think of Jesus Christ, one of the things that strikes me immediately, like a bolt from the blue, is the quality and extent of that energy. Jesus radiated power. You remember what happens in the 5th chapter of Mark's Gospel? Jesus is with the disciples and a crowd milling around him. Then a woman who was suffering from an issue of blood for 12 years comes and touches the hem of his clothes. And Jesus becomes aware of it. And Jesus says, I have sensed power flowing out of me. Power, energy. Now I sit and wonder what kind of a personality it was. Think of the 1st chapter of Mark's Gospel. Jesus goes into a synagogue. There is a man who is sitting and worshiping there who was harboring a handsome demon. And as soon as Jesus enters, this man screams. He says, Son of David, why have you come to torment us before time? The power, the energy, the vitality. Actually, that is the norm. We have fallen away from all this. Jesus came into history. God sent his son into history. Not that some kind of impossible ideal can be demonstrated like a showpiece once in a in a million years, but to benchmark what humanity is as per the plan of God. This is what a human being should be. That's why Jesus says in John's Gospel, chapter 14, verse 12, he who believes in me will do not only what I have done, but greater things than I have done. So don't be amazed at these things, because these are the spiritual normal. If you're spiritually normal, this should be. So obviously by that standard, all of us, particularly this person who pretends to teach you something, we are far away from all this, far, far away. But we stay in this manner because this goal of becoming like Jesus, though we pay lip service to it, never really mattered to us. Even today does not matter to us. And it does certainly is not a priority in our church life. Anything but. So this is the reason why we need to pay far more attention to the idea of spiritual personality and the need that every one of us has to be charged with that divine power. Now, in this context, think of the Spirit. The Spirit is power. In the teachings of Jesus Christ, the Spirit is power. What kind of power? Not mechanical power, not chemical power, not atomic power. It's a different kind of power. And when the Spirit of God comes into us, we are filled with the power and the energy of God, then it is that our life is transformed and we become like Jesus. So when Jesus says, abide in me and I in you, and you will produce much fruit, he actually is underlining our need to be energized as children of God. So it is that energy that is represented, or that's the goal of the practice of prayer. Now, and now this is a very important thing. It's because we are not charged by this incomparable energy of the Spirit that we experience our life as a burden. And Jesus realized that that was the universal condition. The 11th chapter of Matthew's Gospel, verse 28, Jesus says, come to me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Why are people weary and heavy laden? Not because they're doing great things, not because they have physical burdens. The fact of the matter is that we are all short of that energy that we require. I'm now a comparatively old person, and I'm growing older day by day. What I could have done very easily 20 years ago, I cannot do now. It is with great strain that I lift 5 kilograms. It's not that 5 kilograms have become heavier now than it was 20 years ago. It's that I don't have that kind of energy. So when the psalmist says in Psalm 103, I think verse 3, they who wait upon the Lord shall have their youth renewed like that of the eagles. The idea of being recharged. It's very important for us to emphasize the importance of this energy. And this energy is not a luxury. It's not an optional extra. It is the rock bottom requirement of every human being. Now, the alternative to acquiring that energy is degrading life into a weary, burdensome thing and carrying it, cursing on our heads all the way through. And Jesus looks at the world and finds that this is a human condition. And Jesus actually weeps over it. So the rest that Jesus offers to us is not exemption from the work of this world or the struggle of this world. It is actually the rest of being energized. In spiritual terms, rest is not absence of work or struggle. Rest is a state of being energized. Because in the state of being energized, we combine both rest and bliss, the dynamic state, the dynamic rest. And it's something that cannot be compared to any other human experience. So think more of this. Therefore, all of us must realize that the substance of our life, the range of our activities, the responsibilities that we share, the struggles that we have to cope with, it's not too much. It's actually nothing. When people tell me that, I have no time, I have to do this, I have to do that, I have to do this. See, when I was the principal, I used to encourage my colleagues to do a little more research, a little more writing, make some contribution to the quantity of knowledge. After all, a great institution must be distinguished by the contributions it makes to the general fund of knowledge, not merely by recycling or warehousing existing knowledge. They always used to tell you, you don't know how burdened we are. We have to take 14 lectures a week. It's a great burden. And I used to tell them, the burden is not that you have to take 14 classes. I used to work nearly 36 to 40 hours per week when they were working 14 hours a week. But I never felt burdened. The burden and the weariness that we experience is simply because we are not energized. And prayer must be seen as an experience of energizing oneself in order to seek the kingdom of God and his righteousness. That is where it comes in. There's not energy for, becoming the greatest football player in the world or the greatest dancer in the world or greatest scientist in the world. No, it's the energy for seeking the kingdom of God and his righteousness. And if that is not an agenda for us, why seek it at all? Then why pray at all? So this is the reason why I actually wanted to introduce some skepticism about prayer at the beginning. I did it deliberately. Let me tell you this very clearly. Because, you see, there's no point in doing things in a kind of routine, automatic, mechanical, unthinking fashion. We must know what we are doing in order to do it seriously and properly. So, everybody has only 24 hours. And look at the way people use their time. Shakespeare had 24 hours. Milton had 24 hours. Einstein had 24 hours. We also have 24 hours. What are we doing with the 24 hours? I don't think Shakespeare ever complained. I don't think Einstein ever said that he was burdened. Jesus never said he was burdened. The amount of work he did in three years. As John says towards the end of his gospel, he says, if all that Jesus did and taught is to be included in a gospel, not even the libraries of the world will contain it. Such is the profundity and the magnitude of the work he did. But you never see Jesus saying, oh, too much thing to do. And when others are trying to protect him from children, he says, suffer little children to come to me. There isn't the slightest trace of any strain in Jesus, not because he was having an easy time, but because he was energized by God. And that's the kind of state into which we need to move. Now, if you look for a moment away from ourselves, look at the universe. The universe is sustained by energy. And I believe that the energy that sustains the universe is God. The universe just doesn't, exist like by itself. It is being constantly sustained by the energy of God. Now, we need energy for the body, therefore we eat food, right? We need energy of the mind, therefore we read books. I hope we do. I hope we don't despise the energy of the mind. But we also need energy of the soul, the spirit. And that's where prayer comes in. And of course, related practices. So, in all this, actually, the determining, the decisive element is the soul. Depending on the soul, the body and the mind works. If our soul is filled with inertia, which is the case at the moment, that is why, for example, when I came to Trivandrum, I was a bit hopeful. I thought, I could do work with my fellow Christians here. So the first thing I did was to announce the formation of a discussion group. Free, absolutely free. We could all come together, discuss it. Believe you me, there was not a single response. And that's the state of fellow Christians. Now, this course is a free course. It was widely advertised. How many people? 20, 25. Do you think the rest of Christendom is trying to turn the world upside down? Do you think people are really crushed under the burden of the work that they do? No. People are victims of their own inertia. The very thought of taking a small step forward makes them faint. The idea of reading one page per day makes them feel miserable. The idea of engaging a particular thought in mind even for 5 minutes makes them feel weary. They sink like a sack of potatoes. This is the pathetic state in which we are. And look at Jesus. He went about doing good. He was like a surcharged, a sun of light and life. It's amazing, no? Where is that gone? What has happened? What's happened to the way of Jesus Christ? It's in a pathetic state. Look at the extent to which we have fallen. Look at our plight. So it's very important for us to recognize the fact that we are victims, we are slaves to our own inertia. And in prayer, we need to address this reality and deeply long, prayerfully, earnestly desire to get out of it. Because, my friends, I'm convinced that this inertia is our tomb. You know, the image of Lazarus in the tomb, right? The 11th chapter of John's Gospel. When Jesus actually brought him back to life, he was still wrapped up in clothes. And Jesus says, untie him and let him free. And we're all in that, we're all in the shroud of inertia. We don't have to be like this. Life can be a celebration. Life must be a celebration. Jesus was a celebration. And that's what Jesus says, be imitators of me. Right? So, light is incompatible with inertia. Inertia is darkness. So when Jesus was born, the angels say, people who have sat in darkness, people who sat in darkness have seen a great light. What does it mean? Jesus came to lead people out of the den or the prison of inertia into the freedom of an energized life. And I can only tell you, my friends, That's a wonderful experience to be led into a different zone in this manner. Because I've experienced both. Okay. So praying in spirit and in truth, as Jesus recommends in his conversation with the woman of Samaria in the 4th chapter of John's Gospel, verse 24, has everything to do with maintaining the spiritual dynamism of our life. And that is when we live life in its fullness. And it is quite contrary, it's quite different from using prayer in the kind of low and narrow, selfish way in which we use. Now, one more idea, and I'll close our discussion for today, then we'll entertain questions. We've heard this said so many times that in prayer we seek the will of God or divine guidance. But of course, we use it in a particular manner. How we and to what end, with what purpose we seek the will of God, we all know. I don't have to explain that. Now, the question I want to raise in conclusion is this: why do we need to seek the will of God? We need to do so because no matter how wise you are, no matter how well-read you are, no matter how experienced you are still nowhere near being in control of your life. Why? Because the life of an individual is not only the past, not only the present, but also the future. If life is a continuum, then what is in the future will influence the present also. It is not only that the past will influence the present, but if you're thoughtful, you'll realize that the present influences the past. I tell you how. Suppose you've had an experience 20 years ago. You had a certain understanding or a certain experience, a certain feeling about it. But today you have undergone a different kind of experience. Today you are richer by your experience, your awareness, etc. Today you are spiritually more aware, more enlightened. When you look back on that particular experience 20 years ago, it is changed. It doesn't remain the same. If it remains the same, it means only one thing: you have not grown 1 iota, 1 inch in your life. That's exactly what it means. So the present influences the past influences the present influences the past. So future also influences the present, and that's called hope. Suppose you have no optimism about the future, then you will do nothing. That was a problem with the third servant who was condemned as wicked in the parable of the talents. He only saw a hard-hearted master because he had a negative idea of the future. What do you mean by calling somebody hard-hearted? It means that my future in relation to this man is going to be miserable. It's always the future influencing the present. We have no idea as to the extent to which the future is influencing us. It's happening all the time. Because in the plan of God, everything works together, and that's the idea of eternity. This seeming bifurcation or fragmentation of time into past, present, and future exists only on the axis of time. But on the plane of eternity, present, past, future, all these things exist together. That's the 4th dimension of time, eternity, right? Therefore, God alone has that perspective. And therefore, it makes eminent sense, extreme good sense, to be in, say, communion with God, actively seeking guidance from God with an open mind, not with prejudice, pre-settled ideas and expectations, with an open mind, with inner freedom, to be guided from above. Then it is possible to lead a wiser life. If we trust to our own intelligence, our own wisdom, our own plans, purposes, all of them are wonderful. We are very capable people. I'm not doubting or discrediting anyone's capacity. I'm only saying that the best, the greatest, the wisest among us is still very, very limited. And therefore, we have a need to be guided from above to make sense of life. Now, for example, if you develop this discipline, the inner discipline of seeking God in the specific context of your life, you will know that there is something else at work in your life. If you lack this wider awareness, you think that you are alone, struggling, etc. What is going to happen to me tomorrow, day after, etc. But if you develop this wider awareness, you know that something is also happening. Now, perhaps in the book of Daniel, the fourth person joining the three cast into the furnace heated 7 times is that dimension. They thought they were alone, but there is always that fourth person, right? In the journey on the road to Emmaus, the 2 disciples who were panic-stricken, defeated, frustrated, rattled, they're running away from Jerusalem. Another person joins them. There's always that other person. It's a reality. We are not alone. There's always that other person. It's only when you sincerely turn to, in the struggle of your life, especially as you seek the kingdom of God and its righteousness, it is then that you realize that this is so very real. And I must tell you that the time I experienced this very powerfully for myself is the time when I was deep in the doldrums, actually battling every day for my survival in my tenure as the principal of St. Stephen's College. If you have time, please read my memoir titled On a Stormy Course. The title itself will tell you the story. You will be amazed as to how I survived. And I can tell you as a matter of my testimony, I would not have survived. In fact, there were many times that I really felt that I would return to Kerala in a body bag. I survived, and survived as a miracle in the eyes of many because of this other dimension. I always felt there was something beyond me. And that is a real thing. That's a powerful thing. It's a mysterious thing. It's incomparable. There's nothing in the world that enables me to explain what it is. All I can tell you is that it is there. It is a resource that we can lay hands on. We can claim, we can exercise. And that transforms life. That opens doors to incredible possibilities. So that is where I would locate prayer. There are many more things to be said about. We'll continue this. But let me also now make an announcement. First Saturday in November, instead of the interaction, I'm requesting Dr. Laji Verghese to share his testimony with us. His very rich and very, very sort of inspiring experiences as a missionary doctor in contexts and places that most people will not go to. My elder daughter did a stint of apprenticeship with him. I was in half a mind to go, but then I regarded the difficult journey I had to undertake by bus, etc. Then I sort of held back. So I thought it would do all of us a lot of good to listen to his experiences as a missionary doctor who experienced some of these things that I'm talking about. He'll, of course, present it in the manner that he likes, and is totally free to do so. But next week, we continue with the same theme. But the week thereafter, we'll have, that is the first Saturday in November, we'll have a special session by Dr. Laji. Okay, so now is the time for interaction. I noticed Sunita Verghese. Is Sunita joining us for the first time? Hi, Sunita.
Hello, yes. I'm joining you for the first time.
Oh, thank you. We were delighted to have you with us. I hope you have a good time. You find it worthwhile to be with this group. Okay, thank you. God bless you. Okay. Now, questions.
This is a question from
Yes, yes.
From one of the pieces that you had sent to us to read.
Yes, yes.
It's about our desire to be perfect. So how do we contrast that with perfectionism? Because people tend to say that's bad.
Yes. See, perfectionism, as the very word suggests, is abstract. Abstract. And whatever is abstract is impersonal. If you want a more dignified term for it, universal. So being perfect is different from seeking perfectionism, which will always be understood in terms that are impersonal, general, and not person-specific. Now, seeking perfection can drive you to despair because it may have nothing to do with who you are. It may have only what to do with what everyone agrees as constituting the ingredients of perfection. That's an impossible task. So in that particular piece, and that's precisely why I wrote that piece, many people have asked me this question. I wrote that piece to underline the fact that what God expects of us is seeking perfection, not perfectionism, perfection with reference to what we are created to be in our individual specificity. You are not, I'm not like you, you are not like me. We are all unique, in different individual people placed in different specific contexts. We come from very, very, very specific backgrounds. So taking all that together, given that unique human being that we are created to be, endowed with specific talents, specific goals and purposes, seek perfection. Seek perfection with reference to what God has invested in you, what God envisaged you to be. That's all. That is not an impossible task. It's not an easy task. It is not a natural task, but it is a doable thing. Okay? So I'm glad that the question has been asked.
Thank you.
Could I ask one question?
Yes.
Valson, I really liked your statement that the universe is sustained by the energy of God. My question is, if that's so, is God a form of energy or is he a personality?
Yes. I'm sure you know the theological, what shall I say, bottomlessness of the question that you're raising. This is a question that many philosophers asked, particularly the philosopher I referred to in my last session, Benedict Spinoza. Now, Spinoza, of course, emphatically says that God cannot be a person. And this is what he calls the anthropomorphization of God. Anthropomorphization is a very different, maybe tongue-twisting word. It only simply means imagine God as a human being. But we can always argue that the Bible is the warrant or the basis for us to do so, because after all, the book of Genesis says that we are created in the image and likeness of God, and therefore God must resemble us. And therefore, as a syllogistic conclusion, we say that God must be like a human being. But then there are huge issues related to this. If God is like a human being, then why shouldn't we treat God like a human being? In which case, God should be partial to us. God should be, manageable within my human strategies. I should be able to bribe God with a little more money. I should be able to humor God and all kinds. Why shouldn't I manipulate God? That kind of thing. So, the idea that God is energy doesn't actually exclude the possibility that God is a person, because after all, energy is relevant to the person also. idea of person does not exclude the idea of energy. They're not mutually exclusive. It's not either or. It can be both. But the only thing is this: if we understand God as a person only as we understand a fellow human being as a person, then there can be problems. And this is the reason why in the biblical presentation of God, God is presented at once as transcendental and as immanent. God as transcendental cannot be a person. God as immanent can be a person, has to be a person, because immanence is in time. In time, there can be no abstract energy. Energy has to be embodied in some form. Say, for example, even the sun. Sun is an embodiment of energy, right? Even light is an embodiment of energy. In fact, the most basic definition of light is that it is a form of energy, right? So now the thing is this: when we say energy, it has got all kinds of meanings. Now, spiritual energy is one thing. Physical energy is another thing. Intellectual energy is another thing. But I believe that God as energy, the energy that sustains universe, may not be identical to that energy. That is to say, I don't want to say that God is no more than energy, no more than that energy. But I certainly want to say that the energy that sustains the universe originates in God, right? At the same time, I wouldn't say that God, and that's a mistake I believe Spinoza commits. He says that God is no more than that energy. That's where the problem lies, right? So now, obviously, in the Christian teaching, in the Gospels, in the Bible as a whole, there are enough grounds for imagining God as a cosmic person, and through incarnation, fully human, fully divine. And therefore, as the writer of Hebrews says, to the extent that Jesus came and identified himself with us through suffering, we have in him a high priest who is not unable to sympathize with us in our predicament, in our suffering. He empathizes with us, the letter to Hebrews. Therefore, this is an area in theology and in philosophy about which it is impossible to make a dogmatic statement without inviting a host of problems. And that's why I'm trying to negotiate it as pathetically and as cleverly as I can by saying that the idea of energy does not exclude the idea of person, right? After all, a person minus energy is a corpse. If God is living, then God is also energy, right? Okay.
Thank you.
Now, I have to say I'm myself not happy with that answer, but there's nothing better I can offer for the time being. Tomorrow is another day, right? If anyone wants to chip in, please do so.
Can I say something?
Yeah, absolutely. We're all waiting to hear you.
Sorry, I had to go away. I had a guest suddenly landed up.
You shouldn't have said that because none of us realized it. Okay, carry on.
What I observed is I was a workaholic during my working days. I used to be at my seat at 7 in the morning, and I never left my work at 7 p.m. And I enjoyed my profession, which was construction.
Okay.
And then I used to come back, and Sundays I used to go to church, by which time I'm physically a bit on the tired side.
Yes.
And my prayers at that time was superfluous. It's a kind of meaningless, when man is an island, he doesn't have any connection anywhere other than that world of his.
Yes.
And prayer was not meaningful because I could not relate to anything except my own work and I was detached from the realities of the world.
Yes.
So there is a professional aspect to how prayer can influence your life.
Yeah.
Now, you made a point that there has got to be a wider awareness, and wider awareness is a social kind of meeting of people in different circumstances. Now, in the medical profession, I think they have the advantage that they take care of a person, and the person pours out their illnesses. I mean, there's problems, the relations have got no money, there's the father is going away, etc. So then the doctors also get involved in that.
Absolutely.
Psychologically, they are also affected.
Absolutely.
And when they say a prayer, it is far more true and real.
Yes. Yes.
Unlike what is mine. Mine was totally construction.
Yes. Yes.
However, I would say that I had always a sense of satisfaction, because when my colleagues had some problem and they couldn't work, I did the extra to cover them. And that gave me immense peace and happiness. And I sincerely believe that's some form of a prayer in a manner.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't know. The thing is, the social awareness, once you get to know the realities of the world, what the people are undergoing, and then you can relate to them. And then I think prayer is more meaningful. Otherwise, it is a verbal diarrhea.
Yes.
That's all it is.
Yes.
This is my observation.
I love your medical metaphors. Right. Okay. First of all, it's much better to be a workaholic than an alcoholic, right? but I have a point of disagreement, or not disagreement, warning, or a further reflection. That is, it's all right to help your colleagues who could not do their work, but it's also important to find out why they couldn't do their work. Because sometimes by our good intentions, we promote laziness in others.
Where were you when I was working?
I was here. You did. You chose to be far away.
No, yeah, it's a fact. It's a fact.
It's a fact. Now, so what I'm saying is, you see, some people are very clever to discern the soft corners of others and exploit them. And I believe it doesn't do their soul any good to be encouraged in that. Okay?
You know something, you're absolutely 100% right. Which is a realization I got only after I retired.
That's right. Now, because of my extreme humility, I have to tell you, Rene, that I'm always right.
You sound like my wife, you know.
That's not allowed.
Okay. But the thing is, the positive thing is this: because you pitched in, you would have gained. You would have gained in terms of, say, a greater resilience in your own soul, in your own personality, and therefore a greater fine-tuning of your own skills.
Yeah.
You would have become and to the extent you did so, your own work would have become a little less demanding. Because the kind of stress and strain that we feel about our work is determined largely by the development of our skills. For example, I remember it took me more than a fortnight to write my first newspaper article. That was in 1977. Today, I can produce a newspaper article in 2 hours, maximum.
Yeah.
Because one has over a period of time done some work in order to improve one's skill, etc. And therefore, you gained in the process, whereas the other people whom you thought you were helping perhaps were not helped at all.
Yeah. Yeah,
All
but
right.
strangely, if my life was to start all over again in construction,
You do the same thing.
I would do the same thing.
Yeah,
Sadly, you know,
see, again, I'm right.
once an idiot, always an idiot. You know? So I just don't know. I just don't think I could change. You know? But it gave me so much of joy that I think construction is the most gratifying profession. So
that's right. Yes. Yeah. No, that's right. It means that you're a sincere worker. And it's actually quite evident on your face. You still manage to smile in this world. It's a good thing. It's a good thing.
It's the ability to have survived the marriage, you know. Let's see. I've done it.
But you know, if you've been as kind, considerate, and outgoing in your life as a professional, you certainly must be a hit with your wife.
I don't know. I think she's always got the spoon in her hand, you know. But anyway.
No, that is because she thinks that you were born with a silver spoon in your mouth. Okay. Return.
With her spending, I can never own a silver spoon. That's for sure. No, seriously, I have no regrets about having been exploited. If you mean it in that way, I have no regrets because the joy I got was unbelievable, and I would repeat the same thing, you know.
Okay, good.
But what I was trying to say was the social aspect. If I was more related to the people in the hospitals or where a death has happened or something, my prayers at that time would have been far more true to my heart.
Yeah. No, Rene, you're saying something very important. I mean, you see, about 30 years ago, I ran a ministry in Delhi called Ministry to Christians in Professions. My idea was to reach out to Christians in various professions in the specificity of their work. So I had a group of doctors, I had a group of teachers, I had a group of bureaucrats, I had also a group of parliamentarians, right? Then I also tried to form a group of pastors because I thought I could reach out to them. My experience is, and honestly, the easiest professional group to work with and the most rewarding are doctors. The most difficult are pastors, most difficult, priests. Second in order of difficulty are teachers. I found both of them very difficult to handle. Both of them are unwilling to learn. In contrast, I found it is easier to deal with parliamentarians. It's much better to deal with them. After doctors, I found parliamentarians better human beings. I mean, politicians, I mean. Anyway, now let's turn to other questions. We have only 10 minutes left. 9:30 we'll close.
Valson, can I ask?
Yes, Jacob, yes.
A question which you might think, what has this fellow been doing all the while he's been here?
Yeah.
The question is, why pray? One, and the fact that every religion that I know of engages in some form of prayers, either done by the leader of the religion or as individual members of that group. And all the prayers are, a list of what they want, or forgiveness for something they did wrong. And am I right in understanding is that what Jesus has said is pray so that you are energized with his energy?
That's right. You're absolutely right. I think the answer to the question is contained in your observation towards the end. And if I may also very briefly summarize what I've been saying, I said we need to pray because otherwise all the time we are stuck in our routine. And when we pray, we actually break out of that routine and become aware of something larger than ourselves, which is a very beneficial and healthy, and I would say necessary thing. Secondly, we need to pray because we need that extra dimension of guidance in our life, which is very real actually. if we are praying with an open mind and in the truthfulness of our spirit, I believe that guidance will be available to us, provided we have the spirit of obedience. I mean, God is not a fool. If we are praying with rebellious hearts, with no intention to follow up on the guidance or advice given, then that door is shut. Otherwise, if you earnestly seek the will of God, I believe it will be revealed to us. And then, as I said, also this whole experience of being energized. As a simple thing, my mother told me when I was a little boy, you say a prayer before you study. It's a discipline I've tried to maintain in my life, and I found it hugely helpful. Helpful how? Because I found that prayer sort of purifies the mind, enables me to concentrate better, and it also enabled me later on to become aware of the fact that there is a larger dimension to this little work I'm doing. I'm maybe sitting and reading a book in my chair in my private room, but somehow it connects to something beyond me, beyond the present. It's all working up. It is all adding up to something in the future. So it actually served within me as a kind of impetus to persevere and to go beyond the usual understanding of what is required. You see, as a teacher of literature, I could have confined myself to the study of literature. I never did that. I mean, I went far beyond literature to all kinds of things, branches of knowledge and otherwise, because I felt each time I sat down to study, because of this kind of awareness born through prayer, that there was something else that is shaping up. For example, when I was teaching, I got the impression that India is my classroom. You might think that I'm a megalomaniac, but honestly, I connected what I was teaching in the classroom to the condition of India. I never trained my students to write examinations. I prepared them for life. So these things are very real. Now, whether or not we attach any value to it will depend on individuals. But if you do, then you will find that prayer is a very powerful and meaningful experience. Okay.
And there are, so are our prayers only to sustain our life on earth?
I didn't say that. I didn't say that at all. In fact,
I'm asking.
Yeah, no, certainly not. I mean, that's why I made a distinction between existence and aliveness. Mere existence and life in all its fullness. In fact, all spiritual resources, all spiritual disciplines in the vision of Jesus Christ are connected only to life in all its fullness. There is nothing that Jesus does or teaches or prescribes which is limited to the art of mere survival. Nothing at all. Everything that Jesus has provided is geared to attaining life in all fullness. That is actually the spiritual zone. But what we have done is, what has happened over a long, long period of time is that these spiritual exercises are abstracted from its genuine ground and transplanted into the zone of mere existence. And therefore, consequentially, these exercises have suffered a degradation or denaturing. So that now the original purpose is forgotten, and only securing some kind of extra advantage, unmerited extra advantage, through this exercise called prayer has become the sole obsession with the so-called Christian community. That's where the problem lies. And that's the reason why I had to go into all kinds of details. I know it was very boring, it was demanding, it was discursive, but I had to go through this, that, and the other in order to arrive at some kind of clarity on this.
I would just like to add
Yes.
on to what you said.
Yes.
Is that
Right.
I think I would say for myself, I find it very difficult to have a dichotomy
Yes.
between what I'm doing and prayer.
Yes, that's right.
It's like whatever is being done is actually in prayer.
Yes.
And also like the conversation is constant.
Yes, that's right.
It's like you said about being in the classroom and what you're telling the students, that in itself becomes part of prayer.
Yes, yes, that's right.
Imparting maybe a simple advice on a phone call, maybe, you know.
That's right.
You can feel that, you know, you are doing it for a greater cause.
Yes, that's
so
right.
that in itself becomes a prayer. And also those in-between gaps that you have between tasks and so on, there is a constant communion, you know,
That's right. Yes. Yeah. Taking off from where Joanne has left, let me introduce another concept, and that is